That was just a sample of the song I just wanted to play. The song is called A Hard Day's Night, and in 1964, almost everybody knew the name of the song and can identify it within the first chord, like the first few seconds. So, and the Beatles are one of the greatest bands of all time, and I just want to tell you how they came together, how they became famous, and then pretty much how they broke up. So, a few classmates named John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison decided to create a band. And after many changes, another member of the band was recruited, whose name is Ringo Starr. Together, they became one of the greatest bands in history. According to the official worldwide charts, the Beatles had unmatched sales of over 25 million in 1964. And by 1969, the Beatles had top worldwide sales of 300 million units. To comprehend the effect the Beatles had on the world, we're going to look at how they became famous, how they began, and the breakup. So, John Lennon was only 17 years old when he formed his first band. The Beatles actually evolved from a smaller band called Quarrymen. They consisted of John Lennon was one of the original ones, I think, and he was the only one that was also in the Beatles. They played skiffle music, which is a mixture of folk and jazz. And as the Quarrymen were setting up a performance in a church hall, another member of the band introduced Lennon to Paul McCartney, who was only 15, and he taught himself how to play the guitar. He joined the Quarrymen in October that year, and by February 1958, Lennon was moving away from skiffle and towards rock and roll more. This caused the band's banjo player to leave, giving McCartney the opportunity to introduce Lennon to his friend and former classmate, George Harrison. And in 1960, McCartney and Harrison were joined by drummer Pete Best and bassist Stu Cliff. Some of the band names that they thought of were Long John, the Beatles, the Silver Beatles, the Beat Brothers, before finally settling to the Beatles. Stu Cliff ended up leaving the band, and those who remained were Lennon, McCartney, Harrison, and Best, who met and auditioned for George Martin in June 1962 at the Abbey Road Studios, where they would eventually do most of the recording. Martin had some issues with Best, who was not really getting along with the other band members either. They then recruited Ringo Starr, who was the drummer for another popular Liverpool band, Rory Storm, or popular at the moment, and the Hurricanes to replace Best. Now that they had a star drummer and Martin as a producer, the songs began to pour out. After a few albums, the Beatles' popularity began to grow. After appearing on the Ed Sullivan Show in February of 1964, which was watched by an estimate of 73 million people. I don't even know that many people had TVs back then. And the fact that the band had 2 #1 albums in the UK previous year finally convinced Capitol Records to sign the Beatles to an American record deal. By April of 1964, the band's singles occupied the top 5 spots on the Billboard Hot 100. They had several movies. One of the first was A Hard Day's Night, and that was a song that they also wrote called A Hard Day's Night, which was released in 1964. The same year, the band released 7 albums, but three of them charting at #1. The Beatles' immense popularity inspired concept of the stadium concert. The Beatles' immense popularity inspired the concept of the stadium concert. So I guess they're one of the first few bands to start having concerts. More than 55,000 screaming fans packed New York's Shea Stadium in August '65. And that was one of the most popular concerts attended at all times, 55,000 people. Though the Beatles were very successful, they had some trouble behind the scenes. In '66, the band only released 2 albums, and while touring in the Philippines, the summer they were attacked for not accepting an invitation for breakfast at the presidential palace. So the people were offended by that. During an interview at the end of tour, John Lennon tour caused huge controversy. Lennon had an interview and said that he stated that Christianity is dying and that the Beatles are more popular than Jesus now, which was very controversial. And in August '66, the band performed publicity for the last time, Candlestick Park in San Francisco. The show only lasted for half an hour, and after that they decided to stop touring. And around the same time, Lennon fell in love with a woman named Yoko Ono. She slept under the piano and would randomly yell John's name, so everybody was annoyed by that, and she was just a nuisance, and they couldn't really focus anymore. And the group decided to put their difference aside later on to make another album, but they couldn't decide on a business manager, and they had several other issues. Disputes continued once the album Abbey Road is released, Lennon told the band he was leaving, so he wanted to start his own solo career. Okay, in conclusion, after having this information presented, you guys might be able to recall some of their history if you hear a song, or maybe just be able to name A Hard Day's Night if you guys ever hear it. So that's it.
Zachary, what'd you think?
I like the information that he was presenting with us. It was organized chronologically, so it was easy to follow. The only things that jumped out at me was the actual presentation of it. He was reading off his cards for most of the time, and he wasn't really looking up. And Ritz was waving around the time cards, so he never really noticed. But other than that, good.
All right. I think the setup needs a little bit more planning. You've got, I think, a good idea there, because that is a pretty recognizable chord. That was one of the big deals, how quickly people could glom on and identify the Beatles. So I like the idea of the attention device. It just needs a little bit more planning and aplomb, because it doesn't come across as well. Your topic area is clear. Your thesis is very broad. I think when you start talking about the sales and the impact that the band had, then you're giving us a justification to listen to your presentation, and I think it needs a little bit more development there. There's a very basic preview of what the structure is going to be. It's organized chronologically, but I think you need either to pick out particular time periods or events to use to structure the speech a little bit more.